She called the cops on a judge for gardening, but the HOA president was about to face a legal reckoning that would change everything. Our property values, she ranted into her phone, dialing 911 on my wife Eleanor for the outrageous crime of planting wildflowers in our own front yard. Eleanor, my dear wife, was on her knees, hands caked in the rich Colorado soil, breathing in the scent of morning rain and endless possibilities. Her hair, usually so neat for court, was a wild escape from a messy ponytail, and she wore her most beloved ratty gardening jeans. Across the street, Brooke stood like a pristine, terrifying statue on her perfectly manicured, chemically treated lawn. Her face was a canvas of full makeup, her khakis pressed to a knife edge, and her finger jabbed the air with the fury of a conductor leading an orchestra of pure outrage. As the squad car rolled slowly up our street, a shiver ran down my spine. The officer stepped out, his gaze sweeping over the scene. He took 3 casual steps toward Eleanor, the supposed dangerous criminal, lovingly tending her columbines, then froze. His jaw, I swear, actually dropped. "Your Honor, Judge Vance? Is that really you?" he stammered, his voice filled with disbelief. Brooke's clipboard clattered to the sidewalk, its plastic sound shockingly loud in the sudden silence. Her mouth opened and closed, gasping for air like a fish out of water. "Oh, did I forget to mention my wife, Eleanor? Sentences criminals for a living. What would you do if your HOA tyrant called the cops on you for simply gardening? It's a nightmare, isn't it? Let me tell you how we got here. I'm David Vance, 58 years old, a proud veteran of the Colorado Springs Fire Department, having spent 32 years running into burning buildings while everyone else ran out. Eleanor, my incredible wife, has been a municipal court judge for 15 years. She's the kind of woman who handles everything from drunk drivers to petty parking disputes with the patience of a saint and a spine of pure steel. 3 years ago, we moved to Willowbrook Estates, chasing that elusive dream of a peaceful retirement. You know the type of neighborhood, winding streets named after the very trees that were clear-cut to build it, houses that all look like they were designed by the same committee of beige fanatics. It's a mix of retirees like us and young families whose kids' innocent chalk art on the sidewalk somehow manages to offend certain people. Our ranch-style house is modest, nothing extravagant, but Eleanor fell head over heels for the spacious front yard, a blank canvas for the garden she'd yearned for all her life. Her demanding court schedule had never allowed for more than a few sad potted plants on our old apartment balcony. Then entered Brooke Sterling, 62, the queen of Maple Ridge Drive, residing in the grandest house with those purely decorative columns that scream, "Important people live here." A former real estate agent, she wielded the HOA presidency like she commanded a small nation. She's the type who irons her jeans and color coordinates her garden tools. For the first 2 years, everything was perfectly fine. We paid our dues, kept our grass at regulation height, and never parked an RV in the driveway. Eleanor would wave to neighbors on her morning jog, and I'd help folks jumpstart their cars in winter. Just normal, quiet suburban life. This spring, however, Eleanor decided our struggling Kentucky bluegrass needed an upgrade. She envisioned native Colorado wildflowers, columbines, Indian paintbrush, blanket flowers, plants that truly belong here, unlike the water-guzzling grass in our semi-arid climate. She spent weekends on her hands and knees, the sweet perfume of lavender mixing with the velvet-soft earth between her fingers. That's when Brooke launched her first strike. I was savoring my morning coffee, watching Eleanor deadhead spent blooms, when I heard the sharp, insistent click-click-click of high heels on our sidewalk. At 7:30 a.m., Brooke was marching up our walkway like she was serving a federal warrant, dressed in pressed slacks and a cloud of perfume that could fell a horse. "This landscaping blatantly violates our community standards," she declared, waving a flimsy piece of paper that looked like it had been printed on a relic from the last century. "I'm issuing a $200 fine for non-conforming vegetation." Eleanor slowly rose, calmly brushing soil from her knees. In her measured judicial tone, she asked, "Which specific covenant does this in fact violate?" Brooke's nostrils flared. Section 12.444. It clearly states all landscaping must maintain community aesthetic standards. Eleanor, with the patience of a summer morning, replied, "Actually, Section 12.4 only restricts dead or dying vegetation. These are healthy native plants." Brooke scoffed. "I know what I meant when we wrote these rules." And in that moment we knew. This wasn't an honest mistake, it was something far more sinister. Eleanor, ever the meticulous judge, had done her homework. She'd spent 3 evenings poring over every page of the HOA covenants with the same intense focus she dedicates to complex legal briefs. The rules only mentioned removing dead plants, maintaining grass at a reasonable height, and keeping yards free of debris. Not a single word about specific plant types, aesthetic standards, or anything that would render a wildflower garden illegal. But Brooke, we soon discovered, had a pattern. Over the next week we learned of 3 other families she'd targeted. Arthur Jenkins, a 74-year-old Vietnam veteran, received a $150 fine for growing tomatoes where his late wife had tended roses. Brooke deemed vegetables inappropriate for front yard display. Maria Rodriguez, a single mom juggling 2 jobs, paid $300 to erase her kid's innocent chalk art from her own driveway, branded by Brooke as unsightly temporary markings. Every family had something in common. They were either elderly, financially strained, or simply didn't conform to Brooke's rigid vision of suburban perfection. That morning, Eleanor set her coffee mug down with a quiet resolve that would make even the most seasoned attorneys sweat in her courtroom. "We are not paying this fine," she declared. Brooke, of course, wouldn't accept no. 2 days later, a certified letter arrived, so official our mailman apologized for delivering it. The embossed return address, naturally, belonged to Brooke. Inside, the fine had magically doubled to $400. The letter claimed an emergency board meeting had been convened to review our flagrant violation. Brooke's typed minutes boasted a unanimous vote, authorizing enhanced penalties and demanding payment within 10 days or face a lien on our property. One crucial problem: Eleanor called every HOA board member that afternoon. "Emergency meeting?" Arthur's gravelly voice crackled through our speakerphone. "Hell, I didn't know about any meeting. I've been in Denver visiting my grandson all week." 2 other board members echoed the same story. No notification, no vote, no mysterious meeting minutes. It turned out Brooke's unanimous vote involved exactly 3 people: herself, her next-door neighbor Diane, and Diane's husband Gary, who usually slept through HOA meetings in his lawn chair. Eleanor, thankfully, had paid attention during a particularly dull municipal law seminar 5 years prior, a mandatory continuing education course where most judges dozed off. She'd stayed awake for the section on homeowner association governance. Colorado law explicitly requires written notice to homeowners at least 14 days before any fine can be imposed, plus a hearing for defense. Brooke had bypassed all of it, rendering her fine as legally binding as a grocery list. So Eleanor, with the precision of a seasoned legal mind, filed a formal complaint with the Colorado HOA Oversight Division. The beauty of being married to a judge? She knows exactly which forms to file and how to file them. That's when Brooke's surveillance campaign began. Every morning at 6 a.m. sharp, her white Lexus would glide down our street like a shark circling wounded prey. The acrid scent of her exhaust mixed with the morning dew as she'd park across from our house, engine idling, AC blasting even in mild 70-degree weather. Click. A slightly brown blade of grass was photographed. Click. Our garden hose coiled but not on its hook. Click, click, click. Yesterday's newspaper, still in the driveway at 6:15 a.m., earned a dramatic close-up. The slam of her car door became our neighborhood alarm clock. Arthur, bless his heart, started timing his morning walks to coincide with her inspections, just to watch her scramble back to her car whenever he waved and called out, "Morning, Brooke. Getting your exercise?" But this, we realized, was Brooke's first grave miscalculation. While she meticulously built her photo evidence collection against our vibrant wildflowers, Eleanor was quietly constructing something far more formidable. Eleanor began collecting stories. She knocked on doors during her evening jogs, chatted with neighbors at the grocery store, and made mental notes of every mention of HOA troubles. The pattern was uglier than we had imagined. Arthur's tomato plants weren't his first offense. Brooke had previously fined him $50 for displaying his Purple Heart license plate holder, labeling it non-standard vehicle decoration. She only backed down when Arthur's veteran buddies started asking pointed questions about supporting the troops. Maria's chalk art. That was violation number 3. First came a warning about her children's bicycles being improperly stored in their own driveway. Then a $50 fine when her 6-year-old left a soccer ball on the front lawn overnight. Each time, Maria paid, too overwhelmed by 2 jobs to fight. The elderly widow on Pine Street was cited for excessive bird feeding after Brooke decided her small bird bath attracted pest wildlife. Translation: Brooke disliked the cheerful sound of morning songbirds interrupting her backyard phone calls. Every single target shared one unsettling trait. They were either vulnerable, different, or simply unwilling to bow before Queen Brooke's suburban throne. Then came a crucial discovery that changed everything. As Eleanor organized all this information, something made her coffee mug pause halfway to her lips. She cross-referenced the dates of Brooke's violations with HOA board meeting minutes from the past 2 years. Every single fine had been issued during weeks when at least 3 board members were conveniently out of town. Brooke wasn't just fabricating emergency meetings, she was deliberately timing her harassment campaigns for when no one could stop her. "David," Eleanor said that evening, her voice resonating with the same quiet intensity I'd heard when she sentenced hardened criminals. "She's not just power-hungry, she's calculating. This is systematic intimidation." The aroma of fresh coffee and printer ink became permanent fixtures in our home office as Eleanor meticulously built her counterattack, one document at a time. Every photograph Brooke took, every arbitrary violation notice she issued, Every invented rule was being documented by someone who understood evidence collection better than most attorneys. Eleanor was playing chess, while Brooke was foolishly playing checkers, utterly unaware that her queen was about to fall. A week after Eleanor filed her state complaint, Brooke unleashed what she believed was her nuclear option, the architectural review process. The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday, thick as a legal brief and twice as pompous. Brooke demanded that our wildflower garden undergo landscape modification approval through the HOA's Architectural Review Committee. According to her interpretation of the covenants, any change to existing vegetation patterns required advance permission from a 3-member panel. I'd learned about these committees during my fire department days, navigating HOA rules for emergency vehicle access. They're designed to prevent your neighbor from painting their house neon pink or installing a 20-foot Elvis statue in their yard, not to dictate what flowers you plant in dirt that's been dirt for 15 years. Yet Brooke scheduled a hearing anyway. 48 hours notice, community center basement, bring all relevant documentation. Oh, and she was bringing an expert witness, some landscaping professional who would explain why native Colorado plants were somehow inappropriate for Colorado soil. Eleanor hung up the phone after receiving this news and smiled. Not her warm neighborly smile, but her courtroom smile, the one that makes defense attorneys shiver. She wants a hearing, Eleanor declared, opening our bedroom closet. Let's give her a hearing. Thursday evening, 6:30 p.m. The community center basement reeked of 50 years of potluck dinners and budget meetings, a musty blend of stale coffee, industrial carpet, and a faint tang of mildew that even a truckload of air freshener couldn't mask. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like dying insects, casting everything in that institutional beige that makes you wonder if joy is even permissible in municipal buildings. Brooke sat at a folding table with Diane and Gary, looking as if she were chairing a corporate board meeting, not debating flower varieties. She'd brought a full briefcase for a garden hearing in a community center basement. Then Eleanor walked in, dressed in her full judicial robes. I mean the whole ensemble, black, perfectly pressed, her name badge proudly proclaiming, the Honorable Judge Eleanor Vance, Municipal Court Judge. Her hair was pulled back in that severe bun she wears for sentencing hearings. She carried a leather briefcase that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payment. The psychological warfare was immediate and utterly devastating. Brooke's confident posture deflated like a punctured balloon. Diane began nervously fidgeting with her reading glasses. Gary, for the first time in 3 years of HOA meetings, actually woke up and asked, "Is she arresting somebody?" "Good evening," Eleanor stated in her official court voice, the one that makes public defenders straighten their backs. "I understand we are here to discuss Colorado revised statutes regarding homeowner association authority over indigenous plant cultivation." She then opened her briefcase and began laying out documents, not just any documents but a comprehensive legal brief complete with case citations, precedent analysis, and photographs of every single plant in our garden, meticulously labeled with Latin names and ecological impact studies. Brooke's expert witness turned out to be Peter Maxwell, her real estate business partner, a man who had likely never identified a weed in his life. When Eleanor inquired about his qualifications, Peter mumbled something about 20 years in property management and understanding community standards. "Mr. Maxwell," Eleanor said, pulling out a field guide, "can you identify the difference between Aquilegia caerulea and Aquilegia chrysantha?" He blinked. What now?" "The Colorado state flower versus its yellow cousin. Both native columbines, both thriving in my garden. Which one precisely violates your community standards?" Peter looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a speeding freight train. "Well, I mean, it's not really about specific plants. Then what exactly are we reviewing?" The true twist came when Eleanor casually mentioned she'd spent the afternoon photographing Brooke's own backyard. It seemed our HOA president had some rather interesting landscaping choices that somehow never required architectural review. "Mrs. Sterling, can you explain why your ornamental fence exceeds the 6-foot height restriction by 8 inches without requiring approval?" Brooke's face cycled through a fascinating spectrum of colors. That's decorative screening. It's different. And your decorative pond built without any architectural review process whatsoever? It's a water feature. What about your hot tub placement? According to these measurements, it violates the 15-foot setback requirement by approximately 4 feet. The precise scratch of Eleanor's pen taking detailed notes was the loudest sound in that cavernous basement. Every word, every stammered excuse, every blatant contradiction was being meticulously recorded by someone who had spent 15 years listening to people lie under oath. Arthur had shown up to support us, along with Maria and 3 other neighbors who had suffered under Brooke's arbitrary violation spree. They sat in folding chairs like a silent jury, watching Brooke's carefully constructed authority crumble in real time. "This hearing is concluded," Brooke finally announced, her voice strained when Eleanor pressed her to cite the specific covenant language requiring architectural review for native plants. But Eleanor wasn't finished. "Actually, Mrs. Sterling, I have one more question. When exactly did this Architectural Review Committee receive its legal authority to regulate indigenous vegetation?" Silence. The kind of silence that made the buzzing fluorescent lights sound like jet engines. After being utterly demolished in her own kangaroo court hearing, Brooke immediately went for the neighborhood's wallet. A letter arrived exactly 1 week later, delivered to every house in Willowbrook Estates, complete with an official-looking seal designed to make blood pressures spike. Emergency Special Assessment Notice was stamped across the top in angry red letters screaming crisis. According to Brooke's calculations, the HOA's legal expenses defending against frivolous complaints and harassment from problem residents now required an immediate $5,000 assessment from each household, due within 30 days. No exceptions, no payment plans, no appeals. The letter continued, painting a picture of one selfish neighbor forcing the entire community to bear the cost of legal battles that could have been avoided if certain people just followed the rules like everyone else. The woman was trying to turn our neighbors against us, hitting them where it hurt most, their retirement savings. But Brooke made one final, critical mistake. She called a mandatory neighborhood meeting to explain the assessment, and she scheduled it for the very same community center basement where Eleanor had just publicly humiliated her Architectural Review Committee. Sunday afternoon, 2 p.m., the basement was packed tighter than a rush-hour subway car. Retirees who hadn't attended an HOA meeting in 5 years showed up, clutching Brooke's assessment letter like evidence in a murder trial. Young families squeezed between folding chairs, their toddlers, sensing the adult tension, responding with appropriate chaos. The air was thick with anxiety and the lingering smell of whatever church potluck had used the room that morning. Fried chicken and green bean casserole, comfort food that was comforting no one today. Brooke stood at her folding table, wearing a navy blue blazer that shrieked, "Trust me with your money," flanked by Diane and a semi-conscious Gary. She'd prepared a PowerPoint presentation on HOA legal expenses, displayed with a projector older than most of the residents. "Friends and neighbors," she began, her voice dripping with practiced real estate agent sincerity. "We're facing an unprecedented legal crisis because one household has decided to wage war against our community standards." She clicked to her first slide. Legal defense fund, $35,000 required. The number hung in that stale air like a death sentence for those living on fixed incomes. That's when Eleanor stood up. She'd been sitting in the back row with Arthur and me, dressed in jeans and a simple sweater, looking like any other concerned neighbor. But as she rose, something shifted in that room. Perhaps it was her posture, the way she held her legal pad, or simply the quiet confidence forged from years of commanding courtrooms. "Excuse me, Mrs. Sterling," Eleanor said, her voice easily filling the cramped basement. "Before we discuss assessments, could you clarify exactly which legal expenses we're covering?" Brooke's carefully constructed smile faltered. "Well, obviously the costs of defending against your harassment campaign and frivolous state complaints." "I see. And which attorney is representing the HOA in this defense?" "We've retained Morrison Burke and Associates for all HOA legal matters." Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. "Interesting, because according to a Colorado Open Records Act request I filed last Tuesday, the HOA has paid $47,000 to Sterling Property Solutions over the past 2 years for various consulting services." A stunned murmur rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat. "Your company, Mrs. Sterling," Eleanor pressed. $47,000 for what services exactly?" Brooke's face cycled through colors again. Those are legitimate property management consulting fees. For what specific services? Because according to these invoices, Eleanor held up a thick folder. The HOA paid your company $8,000 for landscape consultation services during months when no landscaping work was approved or completed. Arthur stood up next, his voice booming. "She charged me $50 for removing invasive weeds from my memorial rose garden. Turns out those invoices went to her company too." Maria's voice, clear and strong, carried from the middle of the room. "My vegetable garden violation. She told me the fine would go to community beautification, but the check was written to Sterling Property Solutions." The room temperature seemed to plummet by 10 degrees. Retirees who had been clutching their assessment letters in anger now clutched them in dawning horror. "Furthermore," Eleanor continued, her courtroom voice now fully engaged, "I'd like everyone to know that Mrs. Sterling has been collecting fines and fees while the HOA's corporate status was dissolved 18 months ago due to unpaid state filing fees." Dead silence, the kind where you could hear your own heart pounding. "What does that mean?" called out Mrs. Henderson from Pine Street. Eleanor's voice was gentle but crystal clear. "It means every fine, every fee, every assessment collected in the past 18 months has been deposited into accounts controlled by Mrs. Sterling for an organization that legally doesn't exist." The fluorescent lights buzzed louder. Someone's phone rang, hastily silenced. A toddler chose that precise moment to loudly announce his need for the potty. Brooke stood at her folding table, her mouth opening and closing as if she were trying to speak underwater. Then Arthur's gravelly voice cut through the silence like a knife. "Lady, are you telling us you've been stealing our money?" The basement erupted like a shaken soda bottle. "Stealing?" Brooke's voice cracked, higher than a teenage boy's. "I have worked tirelessly for this community. Every fee collected goes directly to maintenance and improvements." "Then you won't mind showing us the bank statements, will you?" Eleanor said calmly. That's when Brooke made her final, catastrophic mistake. She snatched her briefcase, knocked over her folding chair with a crash, and stormed toward the basement stairs, shouting something incoherent about ungrateful neighbors and consulting her attorney. The slam of the community center door echoed through the basement like a judge's gavel. What Brooke didn't know, couldn't have known, was that Eleanor had spent the previous week working with her paralegal friend Jessica at the courthouse, delving deep into HOA corporate records and banking regulations, information most people find more tedious than watching paint dry. When Eleanor filed that Colorado Open Records Act request, she wasn't just fishing, she knew exactly what she was looking for, having seen similar cases cross her bench. Small-time fraud often follows predictable patterns, and HOA embezzlement, she knew, had its own unique brand of stupidity. The smoking gun was sitting in plain sight at the Colorado Secretary of State's office. Every HOA in the state must file annual reports. Miss 2 consecutive years, and your corporate status automatically dissolves. It's like forgetting to renew your driver's license, but with consequences involving thousands of dollars and potentially illegal fee collection. Brooke had missed filing in 2022, 2023, and 2024. For 18 months she had been collecting money on behalf of an organization that, legally speaking, no longer existed. Every fine, every assessment, every consulting fee paid to her company had been deposited into accounts she personally controlled, not legitimate corporate HOA accounts with proper oversight. But the financial fraud was merely the appetizer. The main course was what Jessica uncovered when she cross-referenced Brooke's violation patterns with fair housing discrimination databases. It turned out Brooke's targeting was far from random. She had systematically pursued households that fit specific profiles: elderly residents who might pay rather than fight, single parents too busy to research their rights, families who simply didn't conform to her vision of suburban perfection. The pattern was so stark, it looked like a discriminatory enforcement manual. Arthur's Purple Heart license plate holder, Maria's children's chalk art, the widow's bird bath, my wife's native wildflowers. Every violation had been meticulously chosen to target people who were either vulnerable or distinctly different. Over $23,000 had vanished into accounts only Brooke could access, money collected from neighbors who trusted their HOA president to uphold the law, while she busily invented rules that didn't exist and enforced covenants for an organization that had legally ceased to exist. Eleanor spread the evidence across our kitchen table that night like a general planning a military campaign. Bank records, corporate filings, violation notices, timestamps, photographs, everything needed to prove systematic fraud and discrimination. "We could report this to the district attorney tomorrow," she told me, sipping her evening tea, her gaze fixed on the financial documentation. "Brooke would probably plea bargain, pay restitution, get probation." But she continued, her voice heavy, "That doesn't help Arthur get his memorial garden back. It doesn't compensate Maria for the fear she felt every time she saw Brooke's car in her driveway. It doesn't fix the fact that this woman has been terrorizing our neighbors for 2 years." Eleanor had that look in her eyes, the same expression I'd seen when she sentenced repeat offenders who showed no remorse. Justice for her wasn't just about punishment. It was about ensuring the harm ceased and the community healed. "So what do you want to do?" I asked. She smiled, and this time it wasn't her courtroom smile or her neighborly smile. It was her "David, you are absolutely going to love this" smile. "I want to give Brooke Sterling exactly what she's been demanding all along, a community that follows the rules. All of them, including the ones about fraud, embezzlement, and discriminatory enforcement." The comforting aroma of Eleanor's chamomile tea mingled with the sweet scent of justice meticulously planned. Outside our kitchen window, the wildflower garden bloomed in defiant colors under the streetlight, every petal a small victory, quietly waiting for the war to end. The next morning, our kitchen transformed into mission control for what Eleanor dubbed Operation Wildflower Justice. By 8 a.m., we had assembled the world's most unlikely legal team around our breakfast table. Eleanor sat at the head, laptop open, 3 legal pads covered in her precise handwriting. Arthur, with his military-issued organizational skills, brought a manila folder thick as a phone book. Maria arrived with her smartphone, a portable printer, and the kind of social media savvy that makes millennials a force to be reckoned with when properly motivated. The comforting smell of Eleanor's famous coffee cake mixed with printer ink and righteous indignation as we mapped out our 3-pronged attack. "First priority," Eleanor announced, spreading documents across our table like battle plans. "We restore the HOA's legal standing properly. Arthur, you are going to be our new president. Arthur nearly choked on his coffee. "Ma'am, I just want to grow tomatoes in peace." "And you will," Eleanor assured him. "But first we need someone with integrity to rebuild this organization from scratch, someone who's actually served his community instead of himself." Eleanor then explained Colorado's HOA restoration process. Any dissolved homeowner association can be revived by filing articles of incorporation with the Secretary of State, paying back fees, and holding proper elections with adequate notice to all residents. It's actually simpler than most people think, which probably explains how Brooke got away with ignoring it for so long. The legal technicality most folks miss is buried in Colorado Revised Statutes 38 to 33.5. When an HOA's corporate status dissolves, any covenants requiring membership in a corporation become temporarily unenforceable until proper legal standing is restored. Brooke hadn't just been collecting illegal fees, she'd been enforcing rules she had absolutely no authority to enforce. Second priority, Eleanor continued, her gaze sweeping over our eager faces. We freeze those accounts and recover our neighbors' money. Maria, this is where your documentation skills become crucial. Maria had been quietly building a database on her laptop, cross-referencing every violation notice with bank deposit dates and amounts. Her background in social media marketing meant she understood data tracking better than most forensic accountants. Every fee Brooke collected, every threat she made, every discriminatory comment had been meticulously logged with timestamps and screenshots. I've got 3 years of Nextdoor posts where she complained about certain types of people not understanding community standards, Maria said, scrolling through her files, plus Ring doorbell footage from 6 different neighbors showing her taking photos without permission. The financial recovery part required calling in favors from Eleanor's courthouse network. Jessica had connected us with a civil attorney specializing in HOA fraud cases. It turns out homeowners who have been illegally assessed can recover triple damages under Colorado consumer protection laws plus attorney fees. Third priority, Eleanor said, her voice adopting that undeniable courtroom authority, we make sure this never happens to anyone else in any neighborhood. This was where Eleanor's judicial experience truly shone. She'd seen enough small-time criminals to know that people like Brooke rarely limit their schemes to one location. A quick search of business licensing records revealed that Sterling Property Solutions had consulting contracts with 4 other HOAs across Colorado Springs. Arthur leaned back in his kitchen chair, the same chair where he'd probably planned military operations 40 years ago, and a slow grin spread across his face. You're talking about taking down a whole network of these parasites. I'm talking about following the evidence wherever it leads, Eleanor corrected gently, and making sure every homeowner in Colorado knows their rights. Maria's eyes lit up with the kind of enthusiasm that makes social media campaigns go viral. I can create a resource website. HOA rights, legal procedures, warning signs of fraud, make it searchable by neighborhood. The humorous irony of our planning session was not lost on us. We were essentially organizing a neighborhood watch against our own neighborhood watch president. Arthur suggested we call ourselves the Covenant Enforcement Committee, which made Eleanor laugh so hard she nearly spilled coffee on her legal documents. But the true genius of Eleanor's strategy lay in the timeline. Instead of rushing to expose Brooke immediately, we were going to let her keep digging her own grave while we built an airtight case. Every violation notice she issues from now on adds another count to the fraud charges, Eleanor explained. Every dollar she tries to collect becomes additional evidence. Every discriminatory comment gets documented by people who now know exactly what to look for. By noon, we had filed the Articles of Incorporation to formally restore Willowbrook Estates' HOA as a legitimate organization. Arthur was officially our interim president, pending proper elections. Maria had created a private Facebook group for affected neighbors to safely share evidence. And Eleanor? She was preparing for a legal showdown that would make Brooke wish she'd stuck to selling overpriced houses instead of terrorizing neighborhoods. The taste of victory was already sweet on our tongues, mingling with the lingering flavor of coffee cake and the profound satisfaction of good people finally fighting back. Brooke, predictably, did not take losing control gracefully. Within 48 hours of our kitchen war council, she launched what military strategists would call a scorched earth campaign. If she was going down, she was determined to drag everyone with her, starting with Eleanor's impeccable reputation. The first volley came in the form of a formal complaint to the Colorado Commission on Judicial Discipline. 3 single-spaced pages of accusations claiming Eleanor was using her judicial position to intimidate a dedicated volunteer and create an unfair advantage in civil disputes. She accused Eleanor of judicial bias, conflict of interest, and my personal favorite, weaponizing the legal system for personal gain. The complaint landed on Eleanor's desk at the courthouse on Wednesday morning. She read it during her lunch break, then calmly filed it in what she affectionately calls her "people who don't understand how the legal system works" folder. David, she told me that evening, pruning her resilient wildflowers, Brooke just made her biggest tactical error. She's challenged a sitting judge on procedural grounds without understanding basic judicial ethics. But Brooke wasn't finished. Thursday brought a private investigator. I was replacing a sprinkler head in our front yard when a man in a cheap suit started brazenly photographing our house from his car. Not subtle snapshots, but pictures where he held his camera up to the window as if documenting a crime scene. When I waved and began walking toward him, he sped off, leaving a faint scent of burning rubber. Maria's Ring doorbell later captured him that afternoon, creeping around Eleanor's judicial parking space at the courthouse. By evening, Arthur's veteran network had identified him as Gary Kellner, a bottom-feeding PI notorious for taking cases legitimate investigators wouldn't touch. By Friday, the harassment had escalated to deeply personal attacks. Anonymous flyers began appearing on car windshields throughout our neighborhood, featuring a grainy photo of Eleanor in her judicial robes under headlines like "Corrupt Judge Living Among Us" and "Is Your Neighbor Above the Law?" The typography screamed 1980s conspiracy newsletter, with dramatic fonts and a comical excess of exclamation points. But the true low point arrived Saturday morning. I was loading mulch into our truck at the garden center when I heard a familiar shrill voice behind me. "That's the husband. The judge's husband. They think they're better than everyone else." Brooke was standing 2 aisles over, broadcasting loudly to anyone who would listen about the corrupt judicial family that was destroying property values and bringing crime to our peaceful neighborhood. She had strategically positioned herself near the checkout line to ensure maximum audience exposure. The woman had officially graduated from HOA president to full-time character assassination specialist. That afternoon, Eleanor received a call from her court administrator. Someone had filed a complaint alleging she was hearing cases involving parties from our neighborhood, thus creating conflicts of interest. The complaint was anonymous, but the administrator immediately recognized Brooke's distinctive real estate letterhead from previous frivolous filings. "They want me to recuse myself from all municipal cases involving HOAs," Eleanor explained to me, her voice carrying a dangerous calm that seasoned defense attorneys learned to recognize. "Every parking dispute, every zoning violation, every small claims case that involves any homeowner association in the entire county." The sheer absurdity was breathtaking. Brooke was essentially demanding that a municipal court judge disqualify herself from a significant portion of her docket because one HOA president couldn't handle being caught in systematic fraud. But Sunday night brought an escalation that crossed every conceivable line. Eleanor's 78-year-old mother was visiting from Denver for her annual summer stay. Mom was peacefully watering the wildflower garden before dinner when Brooke, like a cavalry charge, marched across the street. "Excuse me," Brooke announced, startling Mom so badly she dropped the watering can. "You need to tell your daughter to stop this harassment immediately." My mother-in-law, bless her heart, looked at this perfectly coiffed suburban terrorist and, with a gentle smile, asked, "I'm sorry, dear. Do I know you?" Brooke bristled. "I'm the HOA president, and your daughter is destroying our community with her vindictive legal attacks. As her mother, you have a responsibility to control her behavior." Control her behavior, as if Eleanor were a misbehaving teenager instead of a sitting judge. Arthur, walking his dog, witnessed the entire outrageous encounter. By the time I got outside, Mom was shaking, not from fear, but from pure, incandescent rage at being told to control her accomplished daughter by someone who had been stealing from her neighbors. That night, Eleanor sat at our kitchen table, meticulously reviewing judicial ethics guidelines while Mom recounted the story for the 4th time, each retelling fueling her anger. The comforting aroma of Mom's stress-baking chocolate chip cookies mingled with Eleanor's steely determination to end this once and for all. "She just threatened an elderly woman to get to me," Eleanor said quietly, her eyes hardening. "That's not legal strategy, that's desperation. And desperate people," she concluded, with the wisdom of an experienced judge, make the worst possible decisions under pressure. Monday morning brought Brooke's final desperate gambit, a federal lawsuit. The certified letter arrived at Eleanor's courthouse office, thick as a novel and twice as dramatic. Sterling v. Vance, civil rights violation under color of law, was emblazoned across legal paperwork that must have cost more than most people's monthly rent. Brooke was suing Eleanor in federal court, alleging Eleanor had violated her civil rights by using judicial authority to intimidate a private citizen engaged in lawful HOA governance. She demanded monetary damages, injunctive relief, and Eleanor's removal from the bench for constitutional violations and abuse of power. The lawsuit was legal nonsense, expertly wrapped in official-looking formatting, like putting a silk bow tie on a garbage truck and calling it formal transportation. But nonsense or not, federal civil rights claims demand responses, and responses consume valuable time Eleanor should have been dedicating to legitimate court cases. "She's trying to bury me in paperwork," Eleanor explained over dinner, gesturing at the stack of legal documents with her fork. "Force me to spend thousands on defense attorneys while she plays victim in federal court. But Brooke's absolute masterstroke of stupidity came Tuesday afternoon when she decided to take her campaign directly to Eleanor's workplace. I was replacing brake pads in our garage when Eleanor called, her voice tight with controlled fury. "David, you need to get down to the courthouse now." I arrived to find Brooke standing in the municipal court lobby with a homemade sign, crudely proclaiming, "Corrupt Judge Vance, where is justice?" She had positioned herself directly in front of the security checkpoint, ensuring every defendant, attorney, and court employee had to witness her one-woman protest. The lobby, usually smelling of industrial disinfectant and decades of legal anxiety, today carried an extra tang of second-hand embarrassment as court personnel tried to ignore the middle-aged woman having a public breakdown 20 feet from active courtrooms. "This judge uses her position to terrorize innocent homeowners," Brooke announced to anyone within earshot. "She thinks she's above the law. Where's the accountability?" Court security had called Eleanor's chambers, who had called the chief judge, who had called me, because they couldn't legally remove someone from a public courthouse lobby without cause, even if that someone was creating a spectacle that would embarrass a reality TV show. That's when Detective Mike Riley walked through the security checkpoint for his afternoon testimony in an unrelated case. Mike had appeared before Eleanor's bench probably 50 times over the past 3 years. Domestic violence cases, DUI arrests, minor drug possession charges, the routine parade of municipal court business that keeps small cities functioning. He knew Eleanor as the fair, methodical judge who never allowed personal feelings to interfere with legal proceedings. He also knew crazy when he saw it. "Ma'am," Mike said in his professional, calm cop voice, approaching Brooke's impromptu protest. "Is there a problem here?" "Yes, there's a problem." Brooke whirled around, her sign wobbling precariously. "This corrupt judge is using her position to persecute me for doing my job as an HOA president." Mike glanced at the sign, then at the courthouse security cameras recording everything, then back at Brooke. "And you are Brooke Sterling, president of Willowbrook Estates HOA. That woman," she pointed dramatically toward the courtroom doors, "is hearing cases that directly benefit her personal vendetta against my community leadership. The beautiful thing about courthouse lobbies is they're designed for maximum acoustic clarity." Every word of Brooke's rant echoed into adjacent courtrooms, where attorneys were likely wondering if someone had accidentally broadcast a daytime soap opera over the intercom system. Mike pulled out his notebook, the same one he used for actual crime scenes. "What specific cases has Judge Vance heard that involve you personally?" "Well, I mean, she hasn't heard any yet, but she could. It's the potential for bias that matters." "So you're protesting a judge for cases she hasn't heard, involving matters that haven't happened?" Brooke's face cycled through several interesting colors as she realized she had just described her federal lawsuit to a police detective in language that made it sound exactly as frivolous as it actually was. But the real twist came when Mike asked for her identification and ran her name through the system during what he later described as routine verification of a potential disturbance complainant. It turned out Brooke had 3 unpaid parking tickets and a bench warrant for failure to appear on a speeding violation from 6 months ago. The very municipal court system she was protesting had issued a warrant for her arrest, which she had been blithely ignoring while filing federal lawsuits about judicial corruption. The irony was so thick you could have served it with coffee and called it dessert. "Ma'am," Mike said, his voice adopting that formal tone that signals someone's day is about to take a significant turn for the worse, "I need you to come with me." Brooke's homemade protest sign hit the courthouse floor with a pathetic cardboard slap as Mike explained that her outstanding warrant required immediate resolution, either through posting bond or spending the evening as a guest of the county jail system. The taste of justice was finally getting sweet enough to savor. 3 days later, Brooke made the phone call that would end her reign of suburban terror forever. I was pressure washing our driveway when Eleanor's phone rang inside the house. Through our open kitchen window, I heard her voice shift from casual conversation to professional alertness in about 3 seconds. "Yes, this is Judge Vance." "What? Are you certain?" "No, officer, I'll be right there." Eleanor appeared in our doorway, car keys already in hand, wearing that expression she gets when someone's about to learn why lying to judges is a spectacularly bad life choice. "Brooke just called 911, she said, unable to suppress a slight, triumphant smile. "She's reporting me for destroying community property and demanding my immediate arrest for vandalism." The community property in question? My wife's wildflower garden, the very native Colorado plants that had ignited this entire absurd mess 3 months prior, now blooming in defiant splendor. Despite Brooke's desperate attempts at chemical warfare, she had apparently convinced herself that since she was the HOA president, and the HOA governed community standards, and the garden violated her interpretation of those standards, then the garden technically belonged to the community, and Eleanor was destroying it by continuing to tend flowers she'd planted in her own yard. The logic was so twisted it could have been used to teach philosophy students about the dangers of circular reasoning. I grabbed my phone and called Arthur. "You need to get over here now, and bring everyone." By the time the squad car arrived, half our neighborhood had materialized on sidewalks and front lawns as if we'd all received the same supernatural summons. Arthur stood on our driveway, arms crossed, looking like a retired drill sergeant ready to defend democracy. Maria had strategically positioned herself with her phone camera, understanding that moments like this demanded documentation. Even Mrs. Henderson from Pine Street had shuffled over with her walker, determined not to miss whatever was about to unfold. The police cruiser rolled up slowly, probably because Detective Mike Riley could see the growing crowd and wanted to assess the situation before stepping into what looked like a neighborhood uprising. The morning air carried the sweet scent of Eleanor's lavender border, mingling with the palpable anticipation of community justice finally being served. Brooke stood on her manicured lawn, wearing a pressed business suit at 9 a.m. on a Wednesday, clutching a folder thick as a municipal code book, and pointing at Eleanor like she was identifying a suspect in a lineup. "There she is," Brooke announced as Mike stepped out of his cruiser. "The woman who's been systematically destroying our community property in defiance of lawful HOA authority." Mike looked at Eleanor, who was kneeling peacefully beside her columbines in faded jeans and a gardening shirt, a trowel in one dirt-covered hand. Then he looked at Brooke, vibrating with self-righteous indignation in her power suit. Then he looked at the growing crowd of neighbors, all of whom were staring at Brooke as if she had just declared war on gravity itself. "Ma'am," Mike said in his most professional voice, "can you explain exactly what crime is being committed here? Destruction of community property, violation of HOA covenants, defiance of lawful authority." Brooke waved her folder like it contained the Constitution itself. Mike walked slowly toward Eleanor, who rose and brushed dirt from her knees with the quiet dignity of someone who never doubted that truth eventually triumphs over theatrics. "Your Honor," he said, and those two words hit the morning air like a judge's gavel. The effect on our gathered neighbors was immediate and electric. Mrs. Henderson's mouth fell open. Maria's phone camera never wavered, but her eyes went wide. Even Arthur, who had known about Eleanor's profession for months, stood a little straighter. But the effect on Brooke was utterly devastating. Her pointing finger froze mid-accusation. The folder slipped from her suddenly nerveless grip, scattering papers across her perfect lawn like legal confetti. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly, producing no words, just strangled squeaks. "Your Honor," she finally managed, her voice a reedy whisper. "She's your Judge Eleanor Vance, Colorado Municipal Court," Eleanor stated calmly, extending her dirt-covered hand to Mike, who shook it with the deep respect due to someone he had worked with professionally for 3 years. A murmur started low in the crowd, building like distant thunder. Whispered conversations, nervous laughter, the dawning realization among people that they had been witnessing a modern-day David versus Goliath, except David had been wearing judicial robes under her gardening clothes the entire time. "Ma'am," Mike said to Brooke, his voice carrying the kind of patience usually reserved for people experiencing obvious mental health episodes, "are you filing a complaint that a municipal court judge is gardening in her own yard?" Brooke's face went through more color changes than a traffic light having an electrical malfunction. She, the HOA, the my authority." Then Arthur stepped forward, his veteran's voice cutting through the morning air like a command. "Officer, this woman has been stealing money from our neighborhood for 2 years." The dominoes fell faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. Within 48 hours of Brooke's impromptu arrest, she had resigned from every HOA position she held, not just in Willowbrook Estates, but across all 4 communities where Sterling Property Solutions had been consulting. Her federal lawsuit against Eleanor was dismissed with prejudice, legal jargon for "don't ever bring this ridiculous nonsense to court again." The Colorado Attorney General's office moved with surprising speed once the media picked up the story. It turns out no one likes headlines about suburban tyrants stealing from retirees, especially during an election year. Brooke pleaded guilty to theft, fraud, and filing false police reports. She received 3 years probation, full restitution to every affected homeowner, and a permanent ban from serving on any HOA board in Colorado. The restitution checks were almost as satisfying as watching her perp walk, although Arthur insisted the real victory was when his tomato plants won first prize at the county fair 3 months later. That October we held our first truly legitimate HOA election, with proper notice and actual ballots, instead of Brooke's usual all in favor raise your hand while I'm not looking charade. Arthur won president unanimously, though he spent his acceptance speech grumbling that he'd never wanted the job in the first place. Maria became our treasurer, mostly because she was the only person under 60 who genuinely understood spreadsheets. The recovered funds, almost $34,000 including interest and penalties, utterly transformed our neighborhood. We established a community garden where Brooke's former consultation fees now helped neighbors grow vegetables, herbs, and flowers that actually belonged in Colorado soil. The sweet scent of fresh basil and tomatoes now mingles with Eleanor's wildflowers every summer morning, a living reminder that communities thrive when people work together, not against each other. Arthur even donated part of his military pension to create the Willowbrook Educational Scholarship, helping local kids study law, public service, or agricultural sciences. 3 recipients so far, including Maria's daughter, who now dreams of becoming a civil rights attorney after witnessing her mom fight back against discrimination. But the crown jewel was our first annual Wildflower Festival, held exactly 1 year after Brooke's arrest. The joyful sound of children's laughter mixed with bluegrass music, as Eleanor's garden served as the vibrant centerpiece, surrounded by booths featuring native plant societies, and Arthur's famous military-grade barbecue that you could smell from 3 blocks away. More importantly, we had rebuilt something Brooke's reign had nearly destroyed, the simple pleasure of neighbors actually caring about each other. Kids now played in the streets without fear of violation notices. Elderly residents planted memorial gardens in peace. Young families proudly displayed decorations that reflected their actual heritage instead of beige conformity. Eleanor's wildflower garden became a state landmark, featured in Colorado Gardening magazine, and studied by universities researching native plant restoration. The irony was not lost. Brooke's attempts at property value destruction actually increased home values by 15% as word spread about our inclusive, well-managed community. The legal precedent helped other Colorado neighborhoods fight similar fraud. The state legislature even passed the Sterling Accountability Act, requiring stronger HOA oversight. Eleanor now speaks at judicial conferences nationwide, always emphasizing that justice works best when applied fairly to everyone. Last month, a new resident asked Arthur about our neighborhood's reputation for being drama-free and well-managed. Arthur grinned, the taste of his morning coffee mixing with deep satisfaction. Drama-free? We had enough drama to last through retirement. The difference is, we got rid of the person causing it. As for Brooke, she moved to Arizona, where she has already been cited for pool violations and aggressive behavior toward maintenance staff. Some people, it seems, truly never learn.